We now have our third final panel discussion. Who will be the next Guo Bingwen? This panel is moderated by Professor Xiaodong Lin. Let me say a couple words about her. Professor Lin is a professor in cognitive and social psychology. Her research mainly studies the motivation that leads students to pursue science, math, and technology by changing their beliefs about their own competences and intelligence. She is currently directing a large project funded by the National Science Foundation. It's a project that investigates student motivation and student learning. Let's welcome Professor Lin.
Thanks. So that's great. So I will save time. So this panel is going to be extremely controversial and also I really welcome arguments and debates because we can only have one more Guo Bingwen. Who would that be, that person? No, so we actually, this is a very tough assignment, and all of us had a lot of a conversation. Who is next Guo Bingwen? Can we produce another Guo Bingwen? So instead, we were thinking about maybe we split Guo Bingwen into several parts, and then we can share by more people. So that's how we can produce more. So anyway, this panel is going to be presented by Dr. David Gedalicia. Did I do it right? Okay. So he is the professor of Chinese educational history from, am I right?
Just plain vanilla Chinese history.
Okay. From Worcester University, and he's retired, but he really isn't. He's extremely active. So the next presenter is Professor Zhou Huimei from Beijing Normal University, and she studies Chinese educational history. And then we also have a grad student here, which is Zhang Yanqun. Okay, so he is currently pursuing his PhD from Northwestern. And this person does not want to talk, but I drag him here because he's very inspiring and stimulating. So I said, if you don't think that the conversation goes well, you just started to put on the fire in there and get them all up. So this person is Dr. Jim Chen, and he is the director of CV Star East Asia Library at Columbia. And he's extremely interesting, and he actually hid all of our history there, including all our report cards and everything else. So anyway, we'll get started from David, and each person, you want to start first? John Black, our own professor. So John Black has never been to China. However, Dr. Black has contributed significantly to Chinese education. Why is that? Because human development, I heard from international office, has one of the biggest Chinese student population, and lots of them goes to his lab. So John Black is our distinguished professor in the cognitive studies, and he hired me, even when out of the controversial, no one wants me here, and he decided he wants me here. So John Black is a really interesting person himself. He was born in a very poor family from the South and made into MIT and Stanford. And so he has a lot of great histories himself. And so I told him, I said, please help me understand Guo Bingwen. And so he actually got a lot of history from the Chinese, from the TC library, and told me a lot of things I don't know. So together, we wanted to get more educated about Dr. Guo Bingwen. So I will get started from David.
First, I'd like to thank all the organizers of this event, especially Carolyn. But I'd like to thank our esteemed moderator who questioned us at great length. And to Ryan and G, who put this book together that some of you have, I think. Okay, now I better move along, right? I tried to come up with a title. It's called Guo Bingwen, Confucius and Robert Maynard Hutchins, Reflections on Worcester. Let me begin by first quoting two statements by the former president of the University of Chicago. And as you know, Guo Bingwen spoke actually there before Hutchins arrived. Robert Maynard Hutchins, the former president of University of Chicago, said, quote, "Thinking is a painful process, and thinking about education is particularly disagreeable," end quote. And of course, you know, 还有一个问题啊，一个外国人在教育研讨会给你们胡说八道。Even so, Hutchins became one of the true pioneers in liberal arts education by making it clear to people that, quote, "The best education for the best among us is the best education for all," end quote. As if to echo someone with whom you are all familiar, Confucius, who says in Analects 15:38, 有教无类. In education, there should be no class distinctions based on social class and just about any other class you can think of. Hutchins also said, quote, "It is the task of every generation to reassess the tradition in which it lives, discard what it cannot use, and to bring into context with the distant past the most recent contributions." As if here, again, echoing Confucius in Analects 2:11, 温故而知新，可以为师夷. One who, I like that, you know, one who reviews the old so as to acquire the new is qualified to teach others. Kind of a continuity. So what have these parallels between Hutchins and Confucius to do with Guo Bingwen? Well, in 1925, Guo said, and, you know, 对不起，我讲的中文讲得不对。中国可以学习美国科学的知识，可是美国也可以学习中国对人生的想法和鼓励学习中国文化。China may learn from American scientific knowledge, but America may learn from China, her attitude toward life, and promote the study of Chinese civilization. I believe that at least in part, Guo Bingwen came to this conclusion based on his education at the University of Worcester, later the College of Worcester. In 1906, he enrolled in the Worcester Preparatory School, advancing to the university in 1908. His was a broad liberal arts program, literature, history, languages, and religion, balancing science and humanities, and enhanced by membership in literary societies and prize-winning oratorical contests. I might say, speaking out on discrimination against Chinese in the United States at a very early time. At Worcester, he balanced national and international interests as a member of the Chinese Students' Christian Association, which supported Sun Yat-sen, and also the Chinese Student Alliance, which supported the international peace movement. His interest in international understanding took mature shape at the China Institute and the Sino-American Cultural Society, with which you are all familiar. For Guo Bingwen, education was the key to intercultural progress, reminding us of Robert Maynard Hutchins' Mencius statement that, quote, "One purpose of education is to draw out the elements of our common human nature." And I know that my friend, I'm not sure where he is, or Zhang Yachun, said much the same thing in his talk. Guo Bingwen's goals at Worcester shifted from a possible career in law to a direction in education, and it's fitting that we honor him today at Teachers College in tracing the evolution of his educational ideals from his undergraduate years at Worcester onward. And I just found out something today. 2 days ago, in an article in USA Today, President Drew Faust of Harvard discussed in general terms the value of a college education, and she concluded as follows, quote, "I often ask students as they are approaching graduation how they are different from when they arrived at college. They say they know more. Sometimes they say they found a passion they had never imagined, a field, a profession to which they intend to devote their lives. But what is most important," they often tell me, is that they have a new way of approaching the world through the power of learning, analyzing, changing to adapt what they have come to understand. The value of higher education is embodied by people who dream bigger and achieve more, who create their own futures and shape their own destinies. And so I dedicate that statement of 2 days ago to Guo Bingwen on this 100th anniversary. Thank you.
And yeah.
I was on time?
Oh, extremely. Even save 1 minute.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hui Mei Zhou. Thank you for coming to listen my speech. For me, it come back. Last month, I am visiting scholar of Teachers College. My supervisor is Professor Meng Song. So I will hope next time to come back again. And today, I will share with you is who will be next Guo Bingwen for Guo Bingwen stage example. Oh, my main topic of on this book, chapter 3, page from 88 for 112. Now, I'm beginning to my interesting speech. My divided 5 pages. The past research, the academic have a high dinner of understand regarding Guo Bingwen's unique international idea exchange. The image of Dr. Hassens and his fading of National Southern University. However, it is strange of phenomenon that academic come down widely research have research historical to back up this conclusion. So, my research, my study intended to explore the following research question. The data source supposed come from 2 major metaphors, field and school record of Guo Bingwen in Teachers College, Columbia University, and others people research. My research question focused on 3. First, it answered to why did Guo Bingwen choose the Teachers College. Academic perfectness, his major of the B, and the best of B placed, and the low C. Okay, this one. His academic school activities is one. My conclusion. Environment is most important. This is where we proved Ebenhard in China, Shicun Gaoyuan. I think the academic progress and professor ethics is equally important for Chinese students in U.S. and in China. One way to decide who will be next Guo Bingwen, maybe we need to thinking this data. My research is all. Thank you again. The major is in this one. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so at the danger of generating the wrath from our ruthless moderator, I still want to open up my presentation. Something like a joke about my past. So as a very proud Southerner from China, I always ironically end up in a university somewhere in the north. So when it was time for me to go to college, I was this close to go to actually Dongnan Daxue, but I guess I was not good enough for that institution. So I went to the university in the northern capital, Peking University. And now I am in Northwestern University, which seems to be diagonally different, right, from Southeast University. But thanks to my research on the China Institute and Guobingwen, I think I have been gradually pulled back to the south. So I want to address 3 issues in my presentation, one small one and 2 big ones. So the small one is basically who founded the China Institute, right? Was it John Dewey, Paul Monroe, or Guobingwen, or Hu Shi, right? That's the small question I want to answer. And there are 2 big issues I also want to address, which is the significance of the China Institute, and also related to our panel theme, who is going to be the next Guobingwen. So about the small issue here, I think Professor Ding Gang also mentioned this in his presentation in the morning, that Hu Shi and John Dewey also played an important role, right, in the founding of the China Institute in 1926. I'm sure there must be, a huge crowd of fans of, John Dewey and Hu Shi out there in the audience, and I'm the last person who wants to, begin a fight. But I have to say, based on my research, it's probably more probable that Guobingwen and Paul Monroe actually were the real driving force behind the founding of the China Institute. Why? Because the China Institute was founded by the China Foundation for the Promotion of Education and Culture in 1926. And basically, it was decided in a February meeting of that foundation in 1926. But by then, John Dewey had already resigned his trusteeship at the China Foundation. And Hu Shi, for that matter, was not affiliated with the China Institute at all in 1926. Hu Shi did not become a trustee of the China Foundation until 1927. So I think because of that, and also based on the very established track record of Guobingwen and Paul Monroe as very successful institution builders, I think it's more probable that Guobingwen and Paul Monroe actually founded the China Institute. And here, this is a letter. This is a script of Guobingwen's address when he was invited back to the China Institute in 1943. I found this letter at Herald Newspapers in Washington, D.C. So here, Guobingwen gave his account of how and why the China Institute was founded in 1926. Basically, Monroe asked him to draft a proposal, but Guobingwen was in the United States, right? So Monroe took that proposal back to China in Beijing, and in that February meeting of 1926, that draft proposal by Guobingwen was approved by the Institute. Okay, so I hope the fans of John Dewey were not, seriously offended by my finding here. So move on to the big question here. So what is the significance of the China Institute? I think, in my finding, the very significance of the China Institute lies in the fact that in a time when the right to represent China to foreigners, to Western countries, was largely in foreign hands, China Institute actually provided the very institutional platform for Chinese to disseminate Chinese culture in the United States, and also use this institutional platform to influence American public perceptions about China and Chinese culture. So that kind of institutional platform is very, very important. I think one of the most memorable things done during Guo's tenure at the China Institute probably was to invite Mei Lanfang for a tour, right, in the United States. And you can see the name of China Institute at the bottom of that page, and also Dr. Guobingwen's name among the list of sponsors, right? And the final big issue here, so who is the next Guobingwen? And I think prediction is an extremely dangerous enterprise, especially for students of history. So luckily, I can rely on your collective wisdom on that. But I think in my research, mentoring next generation good leaders, right, is very important. So luckily, we had Dr. Guo Bingwen for China Institute and now National Southeast University, National Southeast, so that's a mistake up there. But who can succeed him? Will we have, more successful leaders as Guo Bingwen in the future generation? How do we, foster future good leaders like him? That's the big question I want to also hear from the audience. Thank you.
So I'll use 3 minutes to, no, it's my turn. Which one am I using? The linear one? Whatever. So I'm kind of a pseudo-psychologist, so I'm not to analyze personality characteristics. So based on all the historians' description and documentation of Guo Bingwen, I did a careful analysis about if we want to measure whether this person is Guo Bingwen or not, what shall we measure? What are we looking at? I also love measurement. So one thing I found is that Guo Bingwen, I really love it. He has low grades but important dissertation, and that fits me so well. And I know Carolyn talked to me about she kind of feel bad that his grades is not too good. I said, let's serve a great point to today's education. So first of all, if you want to Guo Bingwen, you don't have to have a high grades, okay? But you do need to produce a huge good dissertation, have a social impact. Second, how am I going to analyze this person? He had a huge drive and a motivation and a grits. So grits is something people are looking for today, meaning don't give up. And we heard so many stories today about how hard it is to do educational reform, politically, financially, blah, 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 and religiously. And he never gave up. And so we need to analyze whether that person gives up or not as Guo Bingwen. And then the next one I found is that he had a big goal, but very specific. So he's not saying, I saved China, how am I going to do it? I don't know. He's not like that. He has a lot of specific goals. I need to do this, this, this. So I think producing a students with a big goal but specific action plan, hard to do. And that's what we want to have here. Okay, and in China. The next one, he is a community participator, and he actively participates in community service. So for example, I just name a few. There are lots of them. I have evidence to support my measurement. The next one is that he was extremely curious about America and American culture. Let's examine ourselves, Chinese students today. Are you curious about America? Are you curious about American people? Or you think they're just like us? And do you have a lot of friends? So I just Googled internet last night, and there's a highlight came up from New York Times saying, friendless Chinese students today. So that means that Chinese students today don't have friends in America. So that's something for us to reflect on. And the next one, and he was extremely well informed about social issues and world issues. I told all my students, read newspaper, please. Do not just read a paper, newspaper, because he's heavily involved in the world. And that is unbelievable. And then there's a 3. He had a great deal of a love for the, whole and the balanced person. And we need to analyze that. There are a lot of 4 balance he was talking about. The one I love the most is that the balanced investment in faculty and administration. And then he paid close attention to leadership development. He really is the leader everywhere, gave public speeches and also being in the front line about things. And so this is the kind of a Guo Bingwen we need, and also highly driven by quality. That's what I learned. And so all these things, who will be the next person, this is a huge challenge and for all of us to think about. And we're doing several things, and Dr. John Blackwell gave some example. That's why I went before him. And he will give some example of the kind of work he does trying to produce Guo Bingwen. And also, so in summary is that he has a cognitive and non-cognitive skills. Today, we pay so much attention to multiple choice and all the testing about content knowledge. We're not testing social knowledge and competence. And his success, I would say at least half-half. He has to have a social skills, competence, and in order to succeed, to promote his ideas, he doesn't just produce a good dissertation. And so my next question to you is that how can we produce someone who's a global leader with a low grades but a high achievement? And then here, I'm going to turn out to Dr. Black.
Okay, well, I'm not an expert on Kobe Wan or history or China or any of those things, but Xiaodong asked me to be on this panel. So what I took the charge is to imagine, what he would be like today, particularly if he came out of the program that I coordinate, namely the Cognitive Studies program, which Xiaodong is also part of. And so we prize analogical reasoning in that program. So I tried to form an analogy of what it was like in his time and what it's like today, and do a mapping to decide what it would be like. Well, one thing it would take away is our basic framework that we use in the program. And we think you get the best creativity and innovation, and actually there's research to back this up, if you constrain things a little bit. You don't leave things completely open, okay? Constrain it just a little bit and combine that with a variety of other factors. So we give this overall framework, and each of the students bring in their own interests and combine this with the overall framework, and we think we get the maximum innovative and creative result that way. The basic framework has come in recent years, particularly using neuroimaging within cognitive science, where we found that many tasks that we used to think were purely symbolic tasks, and symbolic learning is the kind of learning that you focus on in school, and sort of decontextualize symbolic things. But if somebody has really understood a topic, you look at and they're reasoning about it or they're retrieving a memory, you get the sensory areas of the brain get activated also, not just the symbolic areas. So if we want to build knowledge like that in the students, then they need to have those full sensory experiences when learning, or at least learn to imagine those experiences. Maybe have them first and then imagine them as they sort of go on. So we're kind of thinking about, well, what does this kind of full-bodied education look like, and been doing research projects to do that. This echoes points made by John Dewey, where he focused on the importance of having the right set of experiences to relate the education that you're having to. You only really understand what you're learning in school if you have experiences in your own life that relate to it, and you go through relating this. Now, applying this to our own graduate program, now that means that we don't just sit around and have students talk about research, but they have to become researchers. They have to embody that role and actually go do it. In fact, I think if Kobe Wan was coming along today and with this kind of approach, I think probably the reason he got the lower grades was that he wasn't so much focused on learning the courses stuff. He wanted to cut to the chase and actually go figure out the Chinese history of education and write that up. So that was actually embodying being a historian rather than just talking about it and taking courses about it and taking a bunch of tests. Back then, TC had a lot, in fact, more students than we have today, believe it or not, and they mostly used the multiple choice tests in the classes. And we don't do that so much today. Okay, so now if I can get this to the next slide here. And I skipped 2, so that's okay. Okay, here's some of the, we have a lot of Chinese PhD students currently in the program and have been in the past, so that's in a sense is one qualification for me to talk about this stuff, including Yang Jing, who's one of the fellowship recipients. Okay, so here's an example of some of the, we use a lot of technology in our work too, some of the kinds of projects that we're doing trying to do this. And one of the nice things about current technologies is they allow this kind of embodied approach. So we use multimedia simulations involving both graphics, visual, sound, voiceovers, and movement, where they're interacting by moving their hands and stuff. So they do movements that are conceptually congruent with the knowledge that they're learning, and using things like iPads and touch-sensitive interfaces allow you to do this, but we also have like 3D joysticks and whatever, where you move around in all dimensions, and they also can provide force feedback. So like if you're learning about gear ratios or you're turning gears, when it's harder to turn the gears, it's harder for you to do it with this joystick, or if you're doing a catapult, the same thing, you can feel the force. So having that full-bodied sensory learning of the material, they learn it a lot better, and it transfers, becomes part of the way you think about the world, so that it transfers to other situations too, and we think to the rest of your life. Another example is learning in virtual environments, where you not just read about something, but then you do role-playing relating to it in virtual worlds like Second Life. You're controlling an avatar there. So if you read a piece of history contained from a particular culture, and you go role-play that history, I can't see what that says, 1 minute, okay. Then you learn it a lot better, and you learn in such a way that that it transfers. So like if you're reading a history, if you're reading some literature from that era, you understand it a lot better if you've role-played something from that historical era in this controlling an avatar in Second Life. So I think that's particularly important for learning histories you don't know about and understanding cultures that you don't understand. There's some institution building. I think the educational institutions of the 21st century are going to be virtual ones. So I think that's what he would be building. And these are inherently international, but they also contain national characteristics too, and we put some together. And we're talking about the World Wide Web after all, it's immediately available to everybody. And so I think, and particularly promising, I think it's a mixture of both the virtual world and the real world, where you're doing things online, you're relating to things you're doing in the real world, integrating those two things together, learning for the best from both. So I think building online educational institutions is the key thing, the task that we need to be doing now. Plus, if you're having online learning, one thing we're working on here at TC is a thing called learning analytics. And instead of giving one-shot tests, okay, what you do is you can keep track of everything a student does. And who can, no human being can go back and go through all that, but you can have machine learning algorithms that can do that for you and pick up the patterns and give you an account of what the student is learning. This allows us to adapt the later learning to what they learned earlier, but also means you don't need a big test at the end because you already know what the student has learned by monitoring everything. So statisticians will tell you, one shot, if you're going to make a judgment about uncertain events, like what a student knows, doing a sample size of 1 is not statistically valid. And that's what we're doing with the kinds of tests we use today. This gives you thousands of data points, tens of thousands, over the course of the student's educational history. So you have a much fuller and more valid perspective on what they've learned, and we can get rid of these big, high-stakes standardized tests. Okay, so I think that's the kind of thing that Kobe Wan of today might be doing if he came out of our program.